And the more successful podcasts are the ones that are led with that passion. Go back to any ones you listen to. You can always kind of, the ones that stick around, the ones that you go back to, even if you don't listen to them for like 2 years and you come back, you're like, let me go listen to some other issues, are the ones that like are passionate in there. So it's figuring out like, what is the thing that I can talk about for it?
Hi, I'm Josh Owen. As the owner of a video marketing company in New Orleans, I've been on the quest to learn everything I can about marketing. Everyone has a different style, different strategy, and a different experience. Is there a wrong way to do it? A right way to do it? Let's find out together as we make marketing make sense. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another great episode of Make Marketing Make Sense. Today I'm joined with Will Monson, marketing director at Holy Cross, and a plethora of other things.
Yeah.
And a funny guy, too.
I try.
You know,
Tell a few jokes.
And but you know, we're here to talk, and specifically about podcasting.
Yes, we are.
And I think you know a thing or two about that.
I do. It's one of those things. Like podcast is such a weird medium. Like, it's one of those things. Like, because you can do so much with it, and do so much with like so little. Like, too. Because anybody can do a podcast.
Yes.
It's we live in like. You can buy a $50 Yeti snowball mic, and then Audacity's free, so you can make a podcast for nothing.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that's why we're not only just talking about podcasting, but we're talking about concepting your podcast. Because if anyone can do it, like you mentioned, you know, it then opens up the question, well, how do you really develop your podcast? How do you develop that concept? And so for most of us, we're always trying to figure out, well, especially how do we develop and refine the niche that our podcast is going to be about? Because you can't just be like, my podcast is podcasting. You got to have a niche. You got to have something that you're going to hone in on. How do you go about developing that?
Yeah, and because everybody has a podcast idea. Like anytime I talk about the one that I work on, people are like, oh, I have like 6 or 7 ideas for one. But I think the biggest thing that separates like between that like the concept and the actual thing is just more of like all the stuff that goes in the background. So you were talking about like kind of figuring out what the niche is, and that's part of it too, is kind of figuring that out. And it's such an interesting process. Like it's like any kind of creative, whether it's up on stage, whether it's a video, whether it's a podcast, or any like kind of creative content, it all just starts literally figuring out like, why am I doing this? Am I doing this to set myself up as a thought leader in the field?
Yeah.
Am I setting my business up to like, as here's a new offering, here's a subject that we are experts in, or to highlight other people within there to build up a network? Is that my goal, is to build that network of connectivity? Or is it just simply like a passion project? Like the one that I work on, WRYAT, is that. It's just a passion project. It's me and a bunch of comedian friends got together. We're like, hey, we like writing sketches. We like doing weird, goofy things. Let's put together a podcast and celebrate that. Like, so ours became the passion project, but I've worked with friends and helped develop other ones that are more specifically targeted towards like the business side of things. So finding that niche is one of those things. It really is looking inwards and asking yourself, like, what is that thing I can talk about? And what is that thing that when I start talking about, people who know me very well immediately roll their eyes and be like, oh God, he's going to be going on about this for a very long time. So, because that's the stuff you're passionate about.
Right.
And the more successful podcasts are the ones that are led with that passion. Like any of the ones that, like, go back to any ones you listen to. You can always kind of, the ones that stick around, the ones that you go back to, even if you don't listen to them for like 2 years and you come back, you're like, let me go listen to some other issues, are the ones that like are passionate in there. So it's figuring out like, what is the thing that I can talk about forever? Because the big thing with these things too is unless your goal is like a short one, kind of like serial, where it's only a finite amount of episodes, generally most of them you want them to keep going. So what can I talk about for a while? And then what can I kind of tweak a little bit to always kind of have new content going out there? And it building that filter, whatever that show is. Too. So it's a lot of just kind of looking at those things. If you know what your goals are, kind of going out there and developing content for that as well. So once you get that stuff kind of put together, then you start kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, too, is like there's definitely the goal side. I like how you're talking about like bringing up your goals, you know, figuring out like what is your goal. But then obviously, you know, let's say your goal is to, you know, for, build more sales for your business, how do you start to then develop like, well, okay, I know I have this goal, but like, how am I going to start developing a concept around getting me this goal through my podcast? Like, what would you usually suggest for people to do there?
Yeah. So like if a business is like, okay, like if their goal is like, say they want to set themselves up as more of that expert. Like that is one of the things that will set them apart. A friend of mine in Kansas City, he has one called like the Buck Stops Here. Like they are a marketing consulting agency, and he's like, how do I elevate my business and then showcase people that I know what I'm talking about? Because essentially what his podcast has become is those trust factors in the back end. So if that is the goal, and I know what that goal is like building content around that. And in his big thing is like he pulls in like his networks. He might highlight businesses that he works with. So he's accomplishing another goal of highlighting his customers who come in and are like, this is tactics that we do for our business to help grow it, to connect with different people. Even what we're sitting right here, that's kind of what that is. Your other guests that come on here do that. You are doing that to kind of pull folks in there to build up this network. Because in all honesty, podcasting, it's such a unique kind of form of medium because of not so much the podcast itself, but the kind of community that lives behind it and underneath it and all around it. Because the whole goal of it is to build that kind of community with it too, whether it's setting yourself up as more of a thought leader, but building up this community that helps support it. Because we can throw it out in the ether, but if nobody's listening to it, does the tree fall down?
Yeah, right.
So building up that community with it and kind of having that in factor. So like if a business is doing that, what is their community they want to reach? Who do they want to listen to it? Who do they want to be part of that community?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, what I'm curious about is, when you're describing these, I'm going even back further, as you were talking about, one of the things you see is like the passion. You see like, and you're building, and you want to build this community around the niche and that you have, and you want to show that passion. But it all revolves around that concept that they're building for your podcast. Like you're building a podcast, you have this concept, you have this idea that's achieving this goal. But how do you know if the concept is good? Like, how do you know if what you're doing, it is like, because like you're saying, you want this thing to last forever, and you want, and I mean, I feel like you can have passion, but like ultimately, how do you know what strategy do you try to employ to make sure like, hey, this is going to be a good concept that's going to achieve the goal?
Honestly, it goes back to that community. If I go back, because one of the big things I tell everybody who's thinking about it, like legitimately serious about it, it's like, go film, go record like a test pilot. Because the first 5 are going to be, honestly, not good. Because you're testing it out, you're trying it out in the sandbox. They're not going to be good. But that's okay. Those can live in the can and never see the light of day. Because once you kind of get those first 1 or 2 of them out, you can kind of then take a look at it and be like, is this sustainable? Like, do I have enough ideas to kind of create multiple things? Because the big thing with all of it, like any kind of show, is you're building like that filter. Because that's going to kind of live everywhere in it. So that's how I know if it's going to be good. If I have a good solid filter that I build out, like do I have a tone of voice that's going to go out there? Is it some, like I said, sustainable? But it's also more of along the lines of like, when I have this thing that I'm building, like any idea that might live, when I push it through it, can I push it through it in a way where when people hear my explanation or like my episode on it or whatever it is, instantly kind of reconnects to me? And like whatever the body of work that I'm doing to it. So it all kind of like, I'm giving that unique flavor of it. And then having that community that connects with that, that's how you know it starts getting successful. In the beginning, it's hard. Because podcasts takes a while. It's like anything, some of the bigger stuff in marketing. SEO is a perfect example. Like SEO takes a little while before you know if your efforts are working. Because once again, it's community kind of coming in there and dealing with it, interacting with your website, you popping up slowly on there, building the stress factors. Podcasting is the same thing. Like I can get those out there and get a couple of listeners out there. And a lot of times it's easy in the beginning because I know who those people are. And my friends, and I'm like, hey, can you listen to this on your drive to work? Can you tell me if it's good? And then start taking notes on it, because that same community that helps you kind of shape it up, figure out what that format is in the beginning, is also then going to help essentially be your creative pool later on.
Like your product testers, your the people that you're going to pull from, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And look at some of the educational podcasts too. Like they might be asking certain questions and topics. People submit that. After a while, you have a community that's just doing the work for you.
Right.
So it's kind of building, working within that. So you kind of have this just self-feeding loop. I create the content, but I have a community that's feeding me more content. They're giving me new ideas to kind of evolve as we go, because just what we listen to now might be a little bit different in a couple of years. So if I'm going to do this in a long-term thing, I have to be able to pivot as I go.
Yeah.
And a way to do that is having a community help you to guide you which way to pivot.
Yeah. And one thing I'm also thinking about too is, you had mentioned early on things aren't going to be perfect, but obviously people want to have success early, they want to have success early, but are there things that you can suggest or recommend for people to do before they get into it to kind of prepare themselves for the process, to make sure that whatever they are putting out there early on is closer to the mark than just kind of oh my gosh, I got to figure everything out. And it almost becomes disheartening, because they have to figure so much out.
And a lot of it's just finding market fit. Am I creating something that fits in a market? Because going back to goals, so the way I look at a lot of content is it's supposed to be doing three things. And this is kind of strengthening that in the beginning is am I entertaining with my content? Am I creating content that when somebody listens to, they feel time well spent. Yeah. Time well spent going in there. And when they listen to it, because think about all the podcasts with the interviews and stuff like that, they're entertaining. I'm done, and I was great.
Pop in, pop out.
Perfect.
Learned it. Yeah.
But the other one is educational, which this is kind of a little is along those lines. But you got ones 99% Invisible, stuff you should know. Those are seeking just to give me those mental sound bites when I talk to somebody. I as a listener feel smarter because I listen to it. And then I have something, if somebody brings it up, I can be I heard on a podcast.
Yeah.
Facts.
Yeah.
And then the last one, just elicit emotional responses. So those podcasts, one of my favorite ones is Beautiful Anonymous. He had a 1-800 number that people would call in, couldn't say their name, couldn't say where they're from, and they would have just a legitimate, just honest conversation.
Oh wow!
But what was beautiful about it is, ironically, is you felt for this. Yeah. Because these are people being honest. Because they're I have no stake in it. Yeah. He doesn't know who I am. Yeah. Chris Gethard has no idea who this person might be. But he's having and people who are diametrically opposed to some of his beliefs, those are some of the better episodes because they're connecting. And what's beauty about that is I'm having an emotional reaction to that. I'm feeling now. So I'm either trying to make people feel something, know something, or just simply be that was a good use of my time. Yeah. Because once you have all that stuff, and then going back to the beginning, when I'm building up that niche, is in the beginning you're going to try to find that sweet spot of all three. You love to do all three. Yeah. Because you want people to connect with it somehow. Yeah. So in the beginning, gauging that success is especially in any kind of the starting thing, is talking to people, getting that feedback early. To kind of see where we're at. And then as you go, always going back to it. Because it's a matter of continuous improvement. It's not going to be successful out the get-go. Yeah. One episode isn't going to do anything. Yeah. But a couple of episodes as you go deeper and deeper does. And the other thing too is planning. All of it's going into the planning. Because if I'm planning how I want my content to look and sound and to be interpreted, I can also then plan the other stuff. Because the big thing with podcasting is developing any of them. It's so much fun to come up with the ideas, but it's the doing. Yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot that goes into it.
That's the big rub of it all.
And we're sitting in a room right now with multiple people in here that I know are making, and yours is a video one. We have lighting that goes in there. We have microphones. We have an engineer that's doing this. You and I've had multiple conversations before we got to this point. Kind of going into that. So all that effort that's going in there, because you know what you're getting into, is also you're taking the steps, and that's already made it successful than 99% of podcasts, because just people fizzle out real quick and they just don't want to go any further.
Yeah.
So you can measure the success as you go along, as you continuously improve it, and even gauging on it. Be like, how is my audience going into it? I'm looking back at, like, then I start looking at analytics.
Yeah.
Like, build off of that. Like, am I getting net listeners? Is there things that I can do out there?
Yeah.
What's the social media posts that go to it?
Yeah.
Like, this is videos, so like you can do short little snippets of it and then see with all of that how well it's doing.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it's rough.
Yeah.
It's always rough.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty part in the beginning is then you're playing in a sandbox. So you can keep testing new things out, A/B testing like episodes. Hell, just figuring out your format is going to take a little while. So have fun in the beginning and experiment with it. So because the real gauge of how successful it is in the beginning is literally when you're done, you're like, that felt great. After a couple of them that goes in there, like you personally can kind of feel it. You're like, wow, we're starting to figure this out.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's definitely true. I mean, we've definitely felt that with our podcast. It's like definitely, always when like a guest can walk out of it and feeling like, man, that was it. Like I felt like, we could have gone boxing for a couple more rounds, you know? And so it's really good to hear that. And I feel like that's a good point. And I think you've kind of already like touched on this in general, but I definitely want to like reiterate it to the people that are listening is like, what are the actionable steps, like simple steps that they can really think of if they're like thinking about like, oh, I need a podcast. Well, where do I start with my concept? What are the actionable steps they need to know before they even get there? Like, hey, X, Y, Z, this is what you should do. Yeah.
So taking it from scratch, I have an idea. I know why I'm doing it. And I know kind of what I'm doing it. So from there, it's sitting down and, like I said, planning. Start figuring out. Because a podcast, how often is it coming out is a big question. That's on everybody's mind. So, like, there's a lot you have to, even before you hit record the first time, is to figure out. So, like, how often is it going out there? What needs to go into that? Because equipment-wise, you can start very simply. Just having a recorder of some sort and your computer, there are free options to do all of this. But another thing too is like literally sit down and figure out like how long is this going to be too?
Right.
Because that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Keep
it short, keep it long.
Keep it long. Like I like to look at it in terms of like, is this a podcast I can listen to on the way to work? Or is it a podcast that I'm going to like, it's like to work and back? Or is it like to work back, maybe the next day, maybe during lunchtime? Because some of them are very long.
Yeah.
And so, like, once you have, like, these are, like, those things kind of in the beginning figuring out, then it's moving into and start planning it out. What are my episodes going to do? Like, how do I take this filter that we're building up and apply it to the different subjects? So, like, if I'm doing a podcast, say, for instance, like, I want to do a podcast on the weird questions people ask the doctor, for instance. I know what the concept is. I know I want to bring in guests. So part of the planning is making sure I align those guests. Recording, because a lot of this stuff gets done before time because you need time to edit. But also even looking at the subjects as well. And then making sure the topics and the subjects of each of the episodes, I have enough to kind of contain and keep going. But I'm also planning it and looking at it like, okay, I have one episode about, I'm talking to a urologist. Okay. The next one.
Oh, that sounds like.
I know.
What's that conversation going to get into?
Podcast. Why is it burn?
Yeah. That's a good podcast.
And then, but like, what comes next to it? I've already done one gross thing coming out of my body. Let's do something different. Why does my migraines not go away?
Okay.
And then you're looking at it almost like a playlist too, because I want people to kind of come in and like kind of get those like kind of range of stuff on it. It all fits in that same filter, but like I'm like trying to look at it, and that's where all that planning in the front, like an Excel spreadsheet will come in the beginning, is a plan it out. Because once you get the subjects kind of planned out, I made sure like they all have a few sprinkles on it, but not too many. In terms of like, I'm not putting everything into one. I'm kind of like a little bit across it so I can keep going. If something's really juicy and it's going to be long, I can break that one up. I can revisit it later. But I have all that. I start lining up my guests. I start bringing all that equipment and just do it. Just get out there and do it. Especially if you're starting for the first time, just do it. The real step is hit record and start going. See what works. And then when you're done. You're like, great, that was a great starter episode. Go listen to it. It's going to be painful. I can't tell you how painful it is. I know I sound like a Muppet.
Yeah.
I know every time I listen to it, I'm like,
oh man, yeah. I don't even go back and watch it all the way through sometimes because it's tough.
Hard.
But yeah,
it's hard. But like you get used to that after a while. Like I got used that I sound like the Muppets. They don't let sing. It's okay.
Yeah.
I know I have a nasally voice. It's okay. Yeah. But the beauty part is like then once I get over that, I can go in there and start evaluating the content, especially that first episode. My own podcast. Our first episode was all over the place. We didn't even have the filter built out fully. I was talking before this, like kind of like literally my elevator pitch. Like the whole podcast is a satire of the weirdness of public radio. It's just little mini radio play vignettes, kind of making fun of like different programs on the radio. And it took us literally the first season, because we operate in seasons. We do 10 or 12 episodes. We got done the first thing and we reviewed it. We're like, what worked, what didn't? And then we started we're like, okay, we really need a filter with this. So we asked ourselves like, okay, what is the thing we want people when they listen to this to think and feel? And literally we came up for ours is why is this on the radio? But in a hilarious way. You're like, because literally our tagline is New Orleans' 5th ranked public radio station.
Oh, wow.
Who would celebrate that? Why is that on the radio? So once you have all that and you play with it and you keep going from there. So it's hard to give concrete like step 1, step 2, step 3. Really, step 1 is try it. Step 2 is listen to it. Step 3 is evaluate what worked, what didn't, and then step 4 is do it again. And then it gets better every time. And then every episode gets a little better. And then as you're going with that, you're like, what can I do with it more? Can I take that episode? Like yours is audio and visual. Can I make clips with it? Can I get that out to people? Like, how do I do it? Because we're in a different world now. Reels are a thing. So having the video component is really smart.
Exactly.
But sometimes like mine is different, but like we can take short vignettes, even just putting it out there to see what works. The whole thing is throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks. And then once you figure out what sticks, then it's trying out which sauce sticks even better. So I tried marinara. Is Alfredo going to stick better? Then like, what about my noodle types? And you go with that.
And you just keep on down the Chef Boyardee track. That's wild.
Yeah.
Well, it's like you get in there, you see what works, you see what doesn't work. And after you've realized that this process is very difficult, you call Comfystone. No, but yeah. No, I know the whole, I mean, I think that's, great and, definitely really awesome to hear you, really break it down for people for, for the concepts of their podcast.
Yeah, it's such a different, like I said, it's such a different kind of medium too. It's such a interesting little thing in comparison to the other ones.
Such a sandbox, such a world. And so it's fantastic hearing about it. But before I let you go, I definitely need you to share with everybody where they can find Will and all your great things online in the digital world, in the digital spheres, social media and all.
Yeah, so I like on social media, I'm just like at Reptar Roar. On Instagram, it's a lot of... Right now, it's pictures of my kid. She's a tiny little baby. She's adorable. But some of the comedy stuff. I do a lot of stuff locally here in New Orleans with Big Couch Nola. Just did a show last night. We were doing a storytelling show with modern folklore where we just we talk about... It was a storytelling show where we talk about like myths and legends in our lives. I was talking about the Rougarou at the zoo and how terrifying that thing is in a children's place. So I'm there. My own podcast, you can find it on any of the like podcast places at WYRT, New Orleans Public Radio. Like I said, it's goofy and it's weird, but it's like I said, it's a passion project.
Awesome.
That was my goal with it.
I love that. You're doing a bunch, and we want to do just as much. So at some point we will, but before we do, we'll let you go. See you guys on the next one. Make marketing make sense. Peace out. This has been Make Marketing Make Sense, brought to you by Comfystone. If you need video content for social media, your website, or email marketing, hit up Comfystone at comfystone.com and follow Comfystone on Instagram and TikTok. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.